meeting. I just want to remind everyone that's participating, because I know that we have quite a few that are with us via WebEx and are watching in and tuning in. Our meeting will adjourn today at 2:25, and so our committee assistant will signal at 2:20 that we have 5 minutes remaining. It is my hope that we will get through the hearing. We do have 2 proponents that will testify, and providing that we have enough time after we address questions with regard to Senate Bill 185 in the hearing, then we will have the annual report of language assessment program for the deaf and hard of hearing by Luann Barron. If we are running out of time, then we will reschedule that annual report. So just want everyone to know that we are on we are going to not be able to run over today. So at this time, I will start us with our hearing on Senate Bill 185. I'll call on the reviser to give us an overview on this particular bill.
Thank you, Madam Chair. There is a reviser memorandum with the committee documents for this bill that goes into quite a bit more detail that I am going to get into today. So if you're interested in those, you can find those with the other committee documents. I am going to keep it a little bit more general, especially considering our time constraints. So Senate Bill 185 would clarify the registration requirements of sign language interpreters with the Kansas Commission for the Deaf and Hard of Hearing, which I'm going to refer to as the Commission from here on out. The bill also provides clarification of the duties of the Commission and its administration. So new Section 1 explicitly states that sign language interpreters are required to register with the Commission. Any interpreter seeking to register would submit an application and pay an application fee that would be determined in rules and regulations. The bill would also allow the Commission to grant reciprocal registration or temporary registration to interpreters who are licensed or registered in another state. Section 1 also provides the requirements for registration renewal. The bill also would allow for a criminal history record check as part of the interpreter registration process. The bill would allow the Commission to refuse to issue, renew, or reinstate a registration, or to condition, limit, revoke, or suspend a registration on certain grounds that are listed in the bill. Additionally, Section 1 requires the Executive Director of the Commission to adopt rules and regulations concerning the registration of interpreters and oversight of those interpreters. Section 2 would provide for certain unlawful acts for persons who are not registered as interpreters and for certain entities engaging in certain behaviors regarding interpreters. The prohibitions in that section would not apply to any person or entity that interprets during a religious event, interprets as a volunteer if they are approved by the Commission, interprets during an emergency until the services of a registered interpreter can be obtained, or students who are training to be an interpreter acting under the supervision of a registered interpreter. Section 3 would require the Commission to develop and administer a program and guidelines for the utilization of communication access services, communication access service providers, and interpreter service agencies. Again, with regard to this section, the Executive Director would be authorized to adopt rules and regulations for those communication access service providers. This section would also, much like for interpreters, allow the Commission to require communication access services to submit to a criminal history record check. Section 4 would establish the Commission for the Deaf and Hard of Hearing Fee Fund. Any fees, charges, or penalties collected under the bill would be remitted to that fund, and the Commission could use the monies in the fund to carry out its powers, duties, and functions. And then Section 8 of the bill would add a few additional powers and duties of the Commission, including the power to develop and oversee programs concerning interpreters, affiliate with any professional organization related to the functions of the Commission, and undertake any other actions necessary to administer the Commission's statutory functions. The bill would become effective on July 1, 2021, upon publication of the statute book. And I will note that a very similar bill passed the Senate last year and also passed out of the House committee, but died on the House calendar. And I will be happy to answer any questions.
Committee, what questions do you have for our reviser? I am not seeing any. So let's go ahead and we will move on. Thank you very much, Tamara. Let's move on. And we'll start off with our proponent testimony, Robert Cooper, Executive Director, Kansas Commission for the Deaf and Hard of Hearing. Thank you so much for being with us today, Mr. Cooper.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon, Senator Baumgardner and members of the committee. My name is Robert Cooper, and I am the Executive Director of the Kansas Commission for the Deaf and Hard of Hearing. KCDHH is housed within the Kansas Department of Children and Family in its Rehabilitation Service Division. KCDHH is governed by a 17-member commission, of which 5 ex officio members represent key state agencies and 12 at-large members are appointed by the governor. Based in Topeka, KCDHH works with agencies and organizations throughout Kansas to assure availability and coordination of services for people who are deaf and hard of hearing, including communication access. Since 1982, KCDHH has maintained a registry of qualified sign language interpreters, tracking interpreters' credentials, areas of expertise, and geographic areas of practice within the state of Kansas. KCDHH led a 6-state effort during the mid-80s to develop and create the quality assurance screening to administer testing and to provide a certification for interpreters. The system grew to include about 13 states by 2000 before the system was reverted to individual member states, with ours becoming the Kansas Quality Assurance Screening for KQAS certification. As the number of states increased in adopting or recognizing national certifications, we switched from administering a certification system to registration system in 2014. It was a 4-year transition process. In then 1992, the state legislature adopted an amendment of KSA 755393, B section 11, to grant the executive director with advice and consent of the commission to provide a program of regulation and certification of interpreters. Unfortunately, it was deemed inapplicable to the courts, so the state legislature came back with HB 2257, and that was in 93 to adopt KSA 754355, Section A, through 754355D to require all interpreters to be certified by or registered with the commission or an agency to be designated by the commission. That also granted the necessary authority to designate a local agency to do so and to extend the availability of other communication options if requested and feasible. So the reasoning behind 93 legislation was to provide a proactive precedent to improve policies and legislation concerning interpreters and other communication accessibility needs. Such action at that time was considered an effort by the state to provide greater and equal protection for the rights of deaf and hard of hearing people or anyone associated with these individuals or any other individual with disability, thus surpassing that of the ADA, the Americans with Disabilities Act of 1990. Due to the specialized knowledge needed to make qualification decisions, it was also recognized as a fact, which still applies to this day, that it is usually very difficult to expect any employee of a covered entity or a state agency outside of KCDHH to be capable of making the decision of who's qualified to interpret. KCDHH was the most logical agency to make these decisions since it's already a statewide, has statewide jurisdiction, was providing coordination of interpreting services, and was working very close with local and regional referral agencies to ensure efficient coordination of services. So now we fast forward to where we are today with Senate Bill 185. 28 years have passed and the needs have evolved up to the point where the Commission sees a need for legislative action to update and address the needs of the deaf and hard of hearing people or community, especially where communication access is concerned. Not only that, KCDHH hasn't been able to carry out its purpose under the current parameters. Last year, the Commission put forth Senate Bill 230, and it was passed in the Senate, but didn't get voted on in time before the legislature had to shorten its calendar due to COVID-19. So, Senate Bill 185 is a repeat effort of last year's Senate Bill 230, and it seeks clarity and reaffirmation of the Commission's authority pertaining to interpreters and its role involving communication accessibility for all deaf and hard of hearing Kansans. Although there will be and are some existing provisions in the current state statutes affirming elements associated to the Commission, they've been found to be insufficient. Having the authority to create regulations and rules is necessary to effectuate the Commission's ability to carry out its purpose. This bill uses the same approach typically reserved for passengers, which elevates the Commission's interpreter registration to the same level as any professional license. This bill will also allow the Commission to conduct fingerprinting and background checks of interpreters and serve as a centralized point for individual agencies, making it easier to access interpreters in most instances. As explained earlier, the Commission has been for years providing a certification process and registration for all interpreters in Kansas. We're intent on continuing with the current registration policy, but to provide some additional improvements, including the ability to set registration fees and develop necessary support to strengthen the interpreting field, like endorsements for specialized interpreting skills. This bill will remove some doubts as to whether or not remote interpreting services should be included on KCDHH's oversight. So that's an example of the ways that we see this happening. In addition, this bill will also development of other communication access services. And I'd like to talk about two important elements before I close: fingerprinting and background checks. Currently, most state agencies and other entities, except most hospitals, have been utilizing interpreters without conducting necessary due diligence as required by various state and federal regulations. Such due diligence would usually include fingerprinting and background checks. And if these agencies and entities are suddenly compelled to conduct checks, the backlog would stymie and paralyze the system and thus cause communication accommodations to be sacrificed at the expense of deaf and hard of hearing individuals, even with accessibility laws being clear about such obstacles. This cannot excuse any covered entities from the obligation in providing accessibility. Not to mention, individual interpreters would be subject to multiple fingerprinting and background checks. And it would make it cost prohibitive for these interpreters to continue in their profession. So we would be able to alleviate the situation by having this. Communication access services, as mentioned in the bill, will also broaden the oversight and development of other communication access services to ensure that there are other communication options available should an interpreter not be available or would not achieve effective communication for some deaf or hard of hearing individuals who might not use interpreters. These access services would include, but aren't limited to, real-time translation services, support services for deaf-blind individuals, or other effective methods to make orally or auditorily delivered information available to deaf and hard of individuals, and vice versa. So in conclusion, Senate Bill 185 is a cumulative product of a 6-year effort and extensive dialogue with many partners in the community on how the Commission can best meet the diverse communication needs of hearing Kansans. The time is now. This bill does not seek new funding, but is a means of self-supporting and measurable ability to develop, expand, and create additional communication access services to meet those needs. KCDHH is asking for your full support of this important legislation. Thank you.
Thank you very much. At this time, we'll call on Chris Daly, the Chair of the Kansas Commission for the Deaf and Hard of Hearing. Chris, thank you for being here today.
Senator Baumgardner, and the Education Committee members. Thank you for your time to listen to both my testimony and that of Robert Cooper's. My name is Chris Daly, and I'm the chair for the Kansas Commission for the Deaf and Hard of Hearing. So I'm well aware of all the work that Robert does for us. I've been with the commission since 2014, and I'm here doing what I love best, making sure that the voice of deaf and hard of hearing community members is being heard. KCDHH plays a significant role to ensure that access and other needs are being met in the lives of Kansans who are deaf, hard of hearing, late deafened, deaf-blind, and those who are hearing or have the ability to hear. And many of those may include parents who have deaf or hard of hearing children, sign language interpreters, professionals who are working with deaf or for deaf and hard of hearing people, employers or employees who hire and work with deaf, hard of hearing people, and individuals who may not be able to use their vocal abilities, so are nonverbal due to a speech impairment or brain processing disorder, even though they retain the ability to hear. In regards to the first four groups that I mentioned, those who are deaf, hard of hearing, late deafened, or deaf-blind, these individuals range from birth to senior citizens and cut across all demographics. They participate in a variety of work, educational, and social settings that consist within our cities, our towns, or our rural areas. They vary in their needs, conditions, their preferences, or abilities. Some have additional special needs or challenges in their daily lives. Their language abilities range from being fluent in one or more languages to having significant language delays. They also range in their preference in how they communicate or access information, such as using sign language, utilizing captioning, perhaps that's what they prefer to use, or utilizing their hearing aid technology. Really, the Commission does indeed serve a broad and diverse deaf, hard of hearing community within our mainstream society where all these lives intersect. As a place of expertise, the Commission functions as an advocacy and coordinating agency to best serve deaf, hard of hearing people by working to advocate for and facilitate equal and equitable access to a variety of comprehensive services that are publicly available and have been outlined in our Kansas statutes since the 1980s and 1990s. The Commission, we've experienced a lot of successes. This is true, many accomplishments, but we've also encountered several obstacles, which provide the reason for having this bill. These challenges or obstacles consist of two particular issues. One, most importantly, it will update the statutes in need of being updated and help us better meet the diverse needs of deaf, hard of hearing people. And second, it will clarify a few areas where there are differences of opinions in the interpretations on who has authority in meeting these obligations between the Commission and the Department of Children and Family Services. Please know that this bill represents several years of comprehensive work, analysis, perspectives, and involvement between members of the Commission, DCF leadership, the Kansas Attorney General's Office, Kansas legislators, and revisers. We also have strong support for this bill by members of the deaf and hard of hearing community, the University of Kansas American Sign Language and Deaf Studies Department, and various other individual sign language interpreters who work in the state of Kansas. Based on our work cumulatively so far, I'm very confident that we have the best possible bill that we can present to you for your timely consideration. Thank you so much for your time. Your support will put the Commission in a better place to address critical concerns and initiatives as outlined in our informative and comprehensive 2019 KCDHH Annual Report. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you for your testimony today. Committee, we do not have any opponents. We do not have any neutral testimony. I will share with the committee that last year when we had our hearing on this, we did have folks come and testify, members of the Kansas Association of Deaf, the University of Kansas American Sign Language. We had some students. We had folks that are ASL interpreters. We also had individuals that are currently on the commission or have served on the commission in the past. We knew that their message would be very similar, so that's why we've just kind of streamlined this. At this point, I'll open it up for any questions by the committee, so we'll start with Senator Gossage.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I've read the bill and listened to the testimony, but I'd still like to have clarification because I don't quite understand the purpose of this and what is the need that makes it so essential.
Would Mr. Cooper or Ms. Dowley like to address that? I'll let them jump in first.
Yes, thank you, Senator Gossage, for that question. And it's a good question. The commission is housed in DCF, and from the 90s, there's been years of, quite honestly, some inaction. I think that the purpose and authority has somewhat been forgotten in terms of our commission. And when we got to 2014 and the commission sort of became active again, we started noticing many barriers and questioning why there's been so much inaction, and came to realize that it's a question about the authority between DCF and the commission, that some of the statutes overlap, there's some conflicts in place, and in bringing this bill forward, it will help us gain clarification there. And in terms of the Attorney General's opinion that was released last year, it helped us to clarify many of the questions, but this just leaves or gets us clarification on some questions left unanswered. So this will allow us to move forward in ways that are very critical. The interpreting field, has changed a lot over the years. It has become more professional, has expanded, and has also experienced many challenges. Interpreters not always are able to meet the very diverse needs of deaf and hard of hearing community members and deaf-blind community members. They might need additional services, hard of hearing people who I mentioned in my testimony rely on American Sign Language. There are a number of areas that we feel limited in Kansas, and we want to expand our services, which might create more employment, more work opportunities, which will then allow more deaf, hard of hearing, deaf blind individuals in our community to have access to those greater opportunities, including employment. And quality of lives will increase as a result of it. They will not be dependent upon the state for assistance. They will be fully autonomous and fully functioning members of society in ways that will increase their or allow their potential. So communication access also will allow us to meet the needs of those community members. And we honestly have felt like our hands have been tied. So we hope that the passage of this bill will allow us to do more work and to truly enhance the communication access and equitable access of all deaf and hard of hearing Kansans. I hope I've answered your question.
And I will add another component to that. At this time, the Kansas Commission for the Deaf and Hard of Hearing, they do not have that authority for the interpreter registration process and for those background checks. And oftentimes, that interpreter is working one-on-one. It might even be with a child, definitely in a school setting, in other settings. And so just as we are wanting those background checks on folks that are in our schools and are providing services directly with students, this would allow and require the Kansas Commission for the Deaf and Hard of Hearing to make sure that there is a registration, an interpreter registration process that would be similar to what we think of as like teaching and nursing licensing. It would require the background checks, which haven't been done at this time. Not for all of them. Some of the employees, if they're employed within a school district, that's required for background check, but we do have in interpreters out there, the projection is roughly 1/4 of the interpreters out there that have not, they are not registered, they don't have that licensing, and they have not had those background checks. Senator Straub.
Thank you, Madam Chair. How many other states have this type of licensing or registration process?
Senator Straub, thank you for that question. As of now, my guess would be about 40 states, some type form or acknowledge a certification need. 28 states have some type of licensure. Our neighboring state, Missouri, is an example of that. They have a licensing system and require their own certification to be eligible for that license. And we believe that the registration system would allow us some flexibility to recognize different credentials that are equitable, right? There are a number of different situations from other states. So we want to maintain flexibility at the same time as having a clear system that will protect individuals from causing harm. So 40 states have some sort of system that require credentials for individuals that are working in their state.
Follow up?
And have we had any instances of fraud or abuse of children due to not having licensing? Do we have any documentation of anything that has happened? I assume that most public schools have special education teachers that are probably, what am I trying to say, interpreters. Is this absolutely necessary, or are we just creating another government block to getting the right people in the right place?
I'm gonna start by addressing that question and that issue, because last year, one of the things that did occur when we worked this bill and when this bill went to the floor is there were some folks that said they didn't want this to pass because within their school district, they didn't want their school district to be required to provide someone that was credentialed for interpreting services. And That to me, and I know for a majority of the Senate, that was a significant concern, that if a parent, let's say you had a hearing child that had an IEP meeting, and the parents were to attend, and one or both of the parents were deaf or hard of hearing, that would mean that the district wouldn't have to provide interpreting services for the parent. And so when we are talking about establishing guidelines for communications access services, I can remember several years ago in this very room, in this committee, where we were addressing a different bill that did involve deaf and hard of hearing population in the state. Legislative Services was not certain that they would provide interpreter services for the hearing, and definitely were concerned at the cost and weren't certain that they would provide services for when we worked the bill. So some of what we are talking about is giving this commission that responsibility and the authority to establish guidelines for communication access services. So we've taken baby steps, but there was considerable effort made so that we would have our 2 interpreters for this meeting. We also have an individual that is providing closed captioning for what's going out through WebEx. But I want you to think of your other committee meetings, and I want you to think about what happens on the Senate floor. There is no closed captioning provided. So that what occurs and what we verbalize in our committees and on the Senate as well as the House floor, there are no services being provided as far as how our state public government is doing its business every single day that we're in session to the deaf or hard of hearing community throughout our state. Other questions?
Thank you, Madam Chair. The first part of my question was, were there any instances in our schools of fraud or abuse that would lead to this required licensing? I'm not discounting the need for interpreters in our schools, but I just want to make sure that we're not creating more barriers to getting qualified, or I don't know that qualified is the correct word, but capable interpreters into our schools by creating another, government process or hurdle to doing that. Like I said, I'm not discounting the need for interpreters.
I think that Mr. Cooper has a response for us.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. I think it is a question whether or not abuse or fraud has happened. And there has not been a lot that has happened in our state, but it has happened when or where people become more aware of the need for communication access. It creates a better opportunity, I guess, for people to exploit the system because there's a demand, because there's such an overwhelming need of needing to find interpreters. There are not safeguards in place to prohibit such abuse and fraud or even recognize it. So we want to ensure that we avoid those types of instances. And for example, if there are state entities, and as of right now, interpreters are not required to do background check. It will paralyze the system if that now all of a sudden is required. So by us doing that and taking that on, interpreters will be ready, and it will provide less risk for our consumers out there to be victims of fraud and abuse. We know that communication access will be limited if we were to just make this a requirement. So as the increase, then it will overwhelm the system, and there will be a chance for such things to happen.
I'm going to see if there are other questions first. Committee members, any other questions? Okay, we'll go back to Senator Straub.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So this licensing process is not just for through the education system. This is more for all interpretation for communication for the deaf and hard of hearing. This is not just specific to education, because I was assuming that this was more directed directly to education, since we're in education committee. And I would assume that our local school districts have the authority to already do background checks. I know as a 4-H parent, just to be a simple volunteer in 4-H, they require background checks and have for many years.
We do have, as part of your testimony, we received it from, let's see, this would be from the Division of Budget. They indicate that 300 individuals that are interpreters have already done the background checks, but this isn't just the background check. It's also to validate that they have the credentials they need to be ASL interpreters. So it's not just the background check, but it's also that credentialing to be the interpreters. We're going to go to Senator Gossage, and then we'll go back to Senator Straub.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So my question is, we have several friends that have degrees, and I'm thinking particularly from Johnson County Community College. They have a degree as an interpreter, ASL. So is this going to require them to have additional registration and licensing?
A degree is a form of credential, but I think that Chris or Robert could address what additional testing there is for that credentialing for an interpreter. And it would be very similar.
Yes.
You can graduate with an education degree, but not have a license to teach.
I understand that.
Yeah.
That's a great example, and I will go ahead and answer. Most interpreters that have graduated from Johnson County Community College or the new program at KU Edwards know where they are when they graduate and have an idea of the field they would like to go into, and they're familiar with the registration requirements. So they're now able to test with the national organization or take the BEI credential of Texas that now Missouri uses, along with 5 other states that use that. It's called the Board of Education, Board of Evaluating Interpreters. So those 6 states recognize what we call the BEI in addition to the national certification. So interpreters are aware of those 2 options that they have to gain credentials. We also have something in place called a provisional registration, where they experience in the field, but working alongside a supervisor or having supervision opportunities and support. So this will not affect those students because they're already within the system, and that will not change.
One more, if I may.
Follow-up question?
So if you have a mother who has 3 children who are hard of hearing, she has taken ASL classes herself or training, and she's working with, say, a couple of somebody else's children in tutoring them, would she be breaking the law if she doesn't have her license? And forgive me, I'm just trying to understand now versus after this bill, would anybody who was doing interpreter services be breaking the law if they don't have go under this registration process?
Question and giving me an opportunity. There is a great difference between tutoring someone in ASL, for example, and interpreting. Somebody who was tutoring would not be breaking the law. When a professional is hired do the work of interpreting, they need to be a professional. When they are being compensated for a service, that is very different than providing tutoring or language support on a volunteer, an entertainment or leisure basis. So when we look at employment of professional interpreters, that is the area in which we're concerned, making sure that interpreters are held accountable, interpreters are aware of the requirements and the seriousness of what their work is. So I would say over the past several years, interpreters who are needing to get certain credentials very aware of and will work with us to get those necessary credentials. We just need to have clear authority so that we can make sure people who are engaging in the work of interpreting are acting with integrity and respecting the field and the profession as it is.
Thank you. Madam Chair.
Senator Straub.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I guess my concern is that we are just creating more government red tape unless there are specific instances of abuse or fraud that we can use as the reason for putting more government into our schools and into everyday life and communication. Unless there's specific cases of fraud, then I don't see where it's necessary, because I haven't heard testimony that says otherwise.
And if I may respond.
Absolutely.
Yes, thank you. Because the commission has been in place, we've been involved in education to keep the problem at a minimum. However, there are instances that we have not been able to pursue because of being limited. And our concern is with the increased awareness of the obligation to provide communication access, we have seen increased exploitation. And because the demand increases, and it's increasing exponentially, not at a slow rate. The legislature is addressing a huge need to create accessible communication. And that will take a lot of interpreters, qualified interpreters, out of the community. So there is now, that's going to make the possibility of exploitation greater. So the best thing for us to do is to be proactive. And this is not increasing red tape. It is only to make sure that we have clear authority and ensure the safety of consumers. We have a number of interpreters that we don't know if they've had a background check or not, and they're working within the DCF, providing services for children who may or may not be protected. And I don't think we should be okay with that. Thank you for your consideration and concern about this.
Committee, are there other questions? Did you have a question or a comment? Okay.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Does the ADA, the Americans with Disabilities Act, does that protect some of these concerns on the federal level?
Yes, you cannot limit communication options. That the ADA makes clear. If limits.
We need you to repeat that because we were unable to hear what you're saying with the technology.
Thank you. Yes, the ADA does not allow policies that will restrict communication options. Continued provision of options must be available. And that is our goal as well, to make sure that options are available, communication access options are available. And the provisions if we had limitation.
Any other questions, committee? Yes. Senator Clues.
Not a question, just a comment. And I don't know if I'm missing something here, but to me, it would seem if we're going to have a red tape in an area, this would be an area to have red tape. So we're exercising ourselves on the further side of caution and watching over our kids. So,
And the
That's just
interpreters
my-
are having a difficult time hearing. Could you repeat that question, please?
Can you move your mic closer?
just trying to wrap my head around the conversation. To me, it would seem like if we're going to have some red tape in an area, this would be an area to have red tape in, just to err on the side of caution, to make sure everybody is vetted and our kids are safe. I mean, unless I'm missing something else.
I guess my question would be for either Robert or Chris. Could a school district potentially be found in violation of ADA if they did not provide someone that was adequately licensed or certified to provide those ASL interpreting? So instead, they just called on someone that was a friend of a friend. Could that put them in a position of liability?
To answer that question, not for schools, because that comes under the purview of the Department of Education. It is their responsibility to make sure schools are in compliance. Our focus is on the professionals who are offering services. That is where we are making sure that they are credentialed appropriately if the schools need to employ them. But the schools fall under the purview of that they must fall in compliance with. If they are not in compliance, then they will not be reimbursed. That is out of our scope. We are focused on the individual professionals providing these services.
Thank you. Senator Straub.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Sorry, I just might share that. Sorry. Living in rural Kansas and having a brother who's special needs, I know how difficult it is to, to find adequate caretakers and educators. And I don't want to make it harder for some of the best people to assist our most needy. Sorry, thank you.
I appreciate your comments.
And Senator, your comments touch my heart. Kansas struggles to get access. They are screaming for access, and it all causes an opportunity for greater harm where interpreters who are not qualified, who are providing services to the most vulnerable populations. And we want to have safeguards in place for the possibility of fraud or abuse. We are now in a position where we're not able to have authority. So we want to expand the opportunity of education and growing interpreters in those rural areas so they are able to provide qualified services. So you are on point and concerned deeply.
Thank you. Committee, we are at, just got the warning from our assistant. We're now at 21 minutes after. And so I'm not seeing any other questions. I'm going to close the hearing on Senate Bill 185. And I'm going to ask Luann Barron if she would please coordinate with our assistant for another opportunity that you can come and share the information with regard to your annual report of language assessment. What I don't want to see us try and do is shrink your presentation to just 4 minutes, because I want folks to be able to ask questions and to get a full grasp of the work that's been done so far. So with that, committee, our meeting is adjourned.
Thank you, and that's just fine with me, Madam Ms. Baumgartner. We'll make sure that we have plenty of time to do that, and we'll get back in touch.